Yo, everybody. This is Dr. Leo Kormanik on the Mind Body Marathon podcast here. And today we're going to talk about mindset and mindset as it relates to performance, and which is an important component with regards to, the Mind Body Marathon side of things. But I think mindset matters a lot with regards to how we live life and how we operate on a day to day basis, and also how we put together our performance in general. So today on the show, to my left, we have Dr. Matt.
Hello,
So,
hello.
and then he's a chiro here at the clinic. And then to my right is Cody, and Cody is our rehab specialist. So he's in the back doing all the exercises and working a lot with the mindset of the patients and whatnot. So yeah, so we kind of wanted to touch on this topic basically because we have the Olympics coming up. Dr. Matt and I just worked in Olympic trials for track and field, and last year or last Olympic cycle when we were coming around, we definitely mindset was huge and the limelight because of Simone Biles. Um, and I think it's an important component for all of us to understand as we kind of watch the Olympics and watch people at a high level performance, like kind of what goes on behind the scenes, and then how we can take some of these ideas and apply them to our life and make us more effective. But yeah, before we kind of go down that road, Matt, you got any fun stories from the trials?
Oh yeah, it was a blast. I was there for a week total. So Monday to Monday, got in right before a practice clip of it. So they had one day of competition on Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday was practice. So that was actually a really good experience from a mindset type of thing. Because normally, at these big competitions, it's just go, 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 and they don't have time to like relax and like
Yeah.
actually work the kinks out. And so they came in on Monday. Some of them competed, but a
Mhm.
lot of them were coming in on Tuesday and actually got 2 days full of practice
Yeah.
to get the jitters out, to get a lot of that. So we saw a ton of people just kind of nervous shaking. I probably saw over 80 athletes throughout the whole entire week,
Yeah.
and it was, a lot of them, we've worked together in the marathon before, and I think the marathon's a different realm of things because most of them know, like, all right, probably the top 15 only have a chance of making it
Yeah.
onto the team, where there's literally 500-600 more people that know that they're just here for the experience. Track and field's completely different.
Yeah. Really
It
genuinely had
Yeah,
everybody has a chance.
like, almost everybody has a chance, and so seeing that was a huge different change, over the last, 16 and 20.
Yeah, and Dr. Matt here, there's a joke whenever we work like US champs and trials and stuff, there's a joke that somebody always has the magic touch. A provider comes in and it's like they might get just like a random athlete on their table, and then for some reason that athlete like runs out of their mind. And this year Matt had the magic touch. So he had quite a few like quote unquote no name people that were just like not expected to make the Olympic team, like actually make the Olympic team, which was pretty cool. So yeah, because a lot of that is just kind of coaching them up to that level.
Yeah, that was one of the biggest things, not necessarily, obviously giving them like world-class treatment was a huge part, but the biggest thing was my attitude towards them when they were getting off the table of just like, get out there and kick ass,
Yeah.
like hype them up. I was the hype man. Like everybody was all like shaking hands and like, all right, good luck. And I was
Yeah.
like, get out there and like kick some ass. like,
Yeah.
and that was the biggest thing because, and they did. That was the ones that I didn't have the opportunity to do it because they like just put their headphones on and I didn't get to do that. They didn't necessarily perform awful, but they didn't go above what their capabilities were.
Yeah.
Whereas, when I went in there, there was multiple times where I'm just like, your tissue feels great, your muscles feel great, like the joints are moving super well, like your body's ready. So let's get the mind going.
Yeah.
Let's amp this up.
Yeah, and we can actually tell that about people. We can actually tell when they're gonna run well. Like, you feel it. You feel like you said, I can remember one particular athlete in the 1500. I mean, I couldn't believe how good, their body felt, and, sure enough, they ran out of their mind and did really well. But this kinda brings up, like, one of the first points I wanted to talk about with regards to, mindset and performance is that a lot of these cases where we were talking about, like, yeah, these people weren't expected to make the Olympic team, but they do. But if you talk to them, if we had a sit down conversation with them, they all believed that they could make the Olympic team prior to making the Olympic team. So they all saw themselves as an Olympian before even being an Olympian. And that's a subtle change there because a lot of people, you don't just stumble upon being an Olympian. You don't just like wake up and you're like, oh, I guess I'm good enough to be an Olympian. And here I am, I'm an Olympian. You have to like own it in your mind before it actually happens. And this is an important thing because I feel like people use their workouts and all of that to sort of get that mindset, but these people have the mindset even before they get to that workout, if you know what I mean, or the race. And
Mhm.
I think that's an important thing where we can sense with people on the table if they're in that right mindset.
Yeah. I'm definitely at the trials, like a lot of the really short sprinters, so the hundreds or the jumpers, like they're just like, yep, I know I'm already going to be on the team. I just have to go out and do it.
Yeah.
Versus,
And it sounds cocky,
yeah,
right?
even the 200 though. Like I had several 200 athletes that were like, oh, I don't know, it depends on like, oh, the weather's a little bit off, or like they're already talking themselves out of it.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what I was going to ask. Like, what do you guys notice about somebody that gives you the clue that they are either ready to just like fully perform, or
Yeah.
like if they're a little
Man, that's
off?
great. I tell you what, so one guy, it's a couple of different things where it's like if you already know the person and then you know their personality and they're behaving differently, that's not great.
Mhm.
Meaning if they're very social, very outgoing, and then you're treating them and they're not social and they're not outgoing and they're not smiling and laughing, that's not great. They're in their head too much. Now they're trying to like get their mind right, but they're really just taking it too seriously. And then that's just it. They're at a point where they are wanting it too bad. Um
Well, then their nervous system's all wrecked
and
because
yeah, it's
their
like
brain's not going to fire correctly because in the back of their mind they're having an internal conversation with
yeah,
themselves, and then it's like it inhibits your brain from firing the muscles
yeah.
like properly.
Yeah, and sometimes when you get into those states of mind, you're trying to will yourself to that point, which kind of brings up one of my favorite quotes where it's like, um it's where basically you do not rise to the level of your expectations, you fall to the level of your training. And if everybody believes in their training and that they're prepped the way that they should be prepped, they're very calm. Their body's calm. They adjust well. If a muscle's tight, you treat it, it relaxes really well. You could just tell they're in a good flow state. And I think that's one of the biggest cues. What about you?
Yeah, I mean that I just the energy around them, like they're just stiff and rigid, like walking up to the table. So like at the trials, you have to check in like at a head table, and then from there, they finally walk you back when we're ready. You can just tell somebody's like Vince McMahon, like walking like down the aisle, type of just rigid, and they're just not relaxed at all. Versus some of the athletes that at least made it to the finals, like they've got headphones in, they're dancing around, they're goofing off a little bit. I mean, in their mind, they're pumping themselves up.
Yeah.
They're thinking about the race, but they're still being able to be relaxed about it.
What's really cool is when you so if you take any of these athletes, whether it's, um, somebody like, in March Madness that might surprise the world and do well, or any of these particular athletes, when they're interviewed after the event or the race, they have all their thoughts collected. They say the right things. Have a great presence. You can tell that they're locked in. And, you know, do you ever get nervous talking to your best friend? No, not really. It's just chill. Like you just
Mhm.
come out. If you're not nervous, you're gonna have a good conversation and you go, "Oh man, that person's so poised and so buttoned up and they always say the right thing." It's because 'cause they're not nervous. It's because yeah, there's some nerves there. That's a good anxiety, like, like if you're about to ride a roller coaster sort of anxiety, but it's not like a negative thing. It's just like an heightened performance mindset. But they always seem to say the right thing because they are in the right mindset, and that's the trick. It's not like they've, like, prepped prior to that to say the right thing, it just flows out, like, you're not gonna tell your friend some weird thing, you're just gonna be you.
I also think it makes a big difference too on like the experience level. I mean,
Yeah,
like everybody there for the most part is some higher end collegiate athlete or a pro, and the pros already have a statistical advantage because they go through this pressure so many times where they're not thinking about that pressure anymore. You look at the sprinter pros; they're the ones that are kind of like jumping around, having a good time and everything. They're locked in, but they're still having the enjoyment of it. Whereas like those collegiate athletes, especially if you're a young collegiate athlete, they're just overwhelmed by the
Yeah.
experience.
I think a lot of that comes from, and this is one takeaway that anybody of any level can take away, is that you develop a process.
Mhm.
Like when we had Clayton on the episode, he was talking about he has a process. He takes a shower, he lines up his shoes a certain way, he has a very specific process. I'm sure if we were to follow any president, that would be the same thing. There's a very specific process to get them to that peak stage.
Mhm. Because
And
then you're not thinking about
you're
it.
not thinking about it. Exactly. If your outfit's already picked out, if your shoes are already picked out, if you are like somebody was telling me there was one athlete that was doing really well in the trials, but then right before the final, they couldn't figure out what final piece of their outfit to wear. That's a bad sign. They were ruminating. They were like, "Oh, should I wear this one or this one?" And it's like, dude, that's not a great sign because you're just not in the right mindset. If you're stressing about those little details, then you're not going to react like you need to in the race. Like you have to be like, boom, you know exactly what you want, and it's just got to kind of come natural in that way. So in for all of us in our life, if we want to perform at a high level at work with our families, you know, there is a process, an order, a strategy to things, and I think it's important to sort of understand that and keep that. I think you're really good about that. You have like Cody's like the king of process. Come to work and he's very rigid with things, and the same thing when he has a certain system back in rehab, and yeah. So how did
Yeah,
you?
I mean, it's just like, I mean, I wouldn't really call it muscle memory, but I mean, thinking of every sport that you can play, like
Yeah.
golf, basketball, it's not like when you play that you have to think about all the minor details of shooting the shot or the swing. I think it's just like, you kind of figure out what works through trial and error. And then once you kind of, hone it down, you kind of just try to stay as
Yeah.
consistent with that process, like you just said, as you can.
Yeah, and I think that matters a lot with technical sports, you know,
Mhm.
versus like a sport like, you know, if we're thinking of like a 10,000-meter runner, there's a lot of time to think, a lot of time to recover from error, but in 100 there's not,
No.
you
Right.
know. And so or, you know, a javelin throw there's not. Like, you know, if you get behind the 8 ball that's a dangerous thing. But um so I think like the more time you can sort of process things, the easier that is, and then the sort of less mental strain that would go into it. But I always like to talk about like how like when I was racing my best, I realized that when I was laughing a lot at the line, when I was sort of jovial and just having a good time, that's when I always seem to perform at my highest level. And I think that kind of comes down to this like flow state sort of thing.
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, one of my best races that I had was at States my senior year. And I remember lining up and I had a game plan already set up because I tend to go out too fast in a 5K. And so my coach was like, I want you second to last. And then from there, right when you hit the mile, just go. Cause
Yeah.
I was a kicker. I'm a track athlete by nature. And at the starting line, our whole team, we used to make like car noises like we were revving engines, and everybody just looked at us like crazy.
Welcome to high school.
Yeah, that's high school. But I remember specifically the Gorillas. What's their one big song? Can't think of it often. One of the Gorillaz songs had just came out, and I remember singing it it was
All I
perfect.
can
Like,
think of is Melancholy Hill because that's one of my favorite songs.
yeah, no, it wasn't that Feel Good Inc. or something like
Yeah.
Like it had just came out like probably like 2 weeks before
Yeah.
States, and so I memorized it the night like
Yeah.
the whole week before, so it was perfect because I needed to run like a 5 like 10 or something like that, and it was like 5 minutes and 8 seconds, so I memorized the whole song, and it just chilled me out to not get hyped up in that
Yeah.
like that energy where there's 30,000 people sitting in
Mm.
Scioto Downs screaming at you. And not to go after that, so soon. So
Do you think there's like a fine line of like being too serious versus like,
Well, that's what
I don't want to say joking around, but like, do you think that depends person to person, or
Yeah.
like how do
Well,
you figure that out?
100%. And you're right. I do think it depends person to person. There was a guy on my college team where every time he listened to Linkin Park before the race, he would run bad because he just took himself too serious. He'd be
Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
and he'd be like, paper cuts and all this stuff. It's
Yeah.
like, but every time we could get a hold of him and we can just mess around and kind of like joke and have a good time and then just get him like a little bit looser, he would run well. And he never made this connection. So then he left college and kind of kept running well. But I would see him at races, and if he had headphones on and he's walking around, I was like, dude, that guy's listening to Linkin Park. I know he's not going to run well. Nothing against Linkin Park, but it's just like it put him in this like serious mindset. But sometimes like especially if you're in the technical sport, I think you do need to sort of lock in and think through your points and get prepped. But, if you watch the NBA finals and you watch the guys right before the event, I mean, they're kind of laughing, they're high-fiving each other, and it's a looseness that I think is important. Yes, they have a strategy, but everything, the hay's in the barn, man. They have a strategy, they know how to execute it. There's nothing else to do. They can only detract from their performance by taking it too serious. And so I think that it just sort of depends on the individual, but I think it's always better to just feel comfortable. And usually when you get introspective, you doubt because you look inward and you think too much about what's happening internally, and internally will always, what is the famous quote? It's like, we've met our enemy and our enemy is us. It's like famous, quote from the Roman era. I can't remember who said it, but yeah, it's just like, that's classic. The more you think about you and the more you internalize it, it's going to be a very rough go.
Yeah, there's definitely a gray line in between each of them. I think each sport's different, and then from that each sport, then the individual narrows it or widens it a little bit more. Because you'll have somebody who will listen to like classical music before they go out and perform, versus somebody who's gonna like go listen to Tool. Like there's
Yeah, Anderson Silva he used to hide before his UFC matches, and then he would just sleep. And then,
Like hide from everybody.
yeah, he would just like go away from his camp and just like fall asleep, like turn out the lights and just like fall asleep, like go under the bleachers or whatever. And then they'd have to come get him, and he would just wake up and then just go in the match and just destroy people. So for him, it was just like calm the system down. His mind was so right that he didn't doubt. He didn't want anybody to tell him from the outside what to do. He just knew what he needed to do, and he just needed to shut off the lights and calm his brain. Now that's a pretty high level right there, because I feel like I couldn't actually do that.
Yeah, that's what I was gonna ask. Like, do you think that just comes down to like knowing yourself and knowing like when you need to turn it up or turn it down, and just
Yeah.
trying to be
Oh,
like,
it's
in-
probably
and that's
hundreds
why-
of fights.
That's why like all these books exist, like all these, like, that's why like Ryan Holiday's famous now, because of like we were talking about that before the show, all the Stoic era stuff. It's like, that's why that stuff is coming back out, because everybody is realizing that conquering yourself is it. That's it. In fact, that's why we actually do this sport. We don't run to be the best. That's a weird thing to do. If you're the best one day, the next day you're not the best. I mean, like, the sport is fleeting. The point of all of these sports is to teach us lessons about ourselves and improve us personally. And when you look at running in that way, or any other sport in that way, then it just it takes away from this like zero sum game of like, there's a winner and there's a loser. And it's all a positive sum game where we all win when we all compete. You can literally look at a marathon. Yes, there's a number one first place, but I guarantee the last place finisher in that marathon probably is more proud of themselves than the first place finisher. Seriously, the first place person probably goes, man, I wish I would have run this time, or, I wish I'd have got the record. And the last place person is like, I ran a marathon. I can't even believe it. And it's like, that's a positive sum game where everybody can win. And even if you watch like UFC and there's a winner and a loser, or somebody got beat up, they often like hug each other at the end. It's like a badge of honor to this. It's like, yeah, I got beat pretty bad, but man, I learned some lessons in that process. Like, there's nothing like getting punched in the face. It's like, so I think in the end, it's important to take lessons from all of these sports and apply it to life.
Yeah, I mean, and even if you're having a bad day, you can still. I think we talked about this at one other podcast, where for instance, I was just from the fifth step into a race. I was like, nope, my back cramped up. So what did I do? I just was like, I tried to push it and I couldn't. It would just cause my back to cramp up. So I focused on something, and honestly, it's in my top 5 probably most successful races I've ever done,
Yeah.
because I got through it, which I could have easily walked away from. But I learned so much more because I learned how to pace, like twist my pacing just back and forth to get me there. So I didn't continually keep slowing down more and more,
Yeah.
but I focus on, all right, what's the worst thing that I usually do during a race? My hydration. So I just focused on hydration, and it's made me a better runner for hydration
Yeah.
ever since then. So even like, I mean, I think that like having that internal conversation with yourself and like if something's going bad or you're just out in a race, especially like we said, these longer races, 10Ks, half marathons, ultras, where you have all day to talk to yourself,
Mhm.
like assessing yourself, but then finding small nuances to like kind of focus on and
Yeah.
improve.
But you also have to kind of be like Jekyll and Hyde. You can't, when you're having that internal conversation, you have to come out of it with an action plan.
Hmm.
And then instead of woe is me,
Hmm. No,
you know what I mean?
absolutely.
Like a lot of times when we go internal and we like lock into our head and we're just sort of in the race, we're like, oh, this blister on my ankle. And, oh, I'm starting to kind of feel my hamstring lock up a little bit. And we just sort of focus on the negatives instead of just genuinely flipping the script. And then when you're racing, being like, I am so glad I'm out here.
Hmm.
Like, I'm so blessed that I was able to toe the line today. I'm so blessed that I have a family that's supporting me, that, I had the funds to provide me with a entry fee for this race and the shoe. And you just focus on the positive, and next thing you know, like you find that these weird little things will sort of melt away. And I find that that's one of the bigger things that I have. When I look back to a lot of key races in my career, it's not when I always ran the fastest. It's when I conquered myself a little more
Hmm.
and I gained a little bit more territory on that internal dialogue.
Yeah. I mean, the more you push yourself during, in the extremes like that, and you're able to overcome that during workouts and stuff like that, the easier it is to do that, during a race or during a hard practice. So,
Yeah, and again, not to kind of point out any particular athletes, but we were talking earlier about Simone Biles and before the last Olympics and how she got the yips, right? And it's like, nobody really knows what's going on in her head. It's quite impossible to figure that out. But my point is that even she probably didn't know what was going on in her head.
hmm.
And that's the problem because she has to know what's going on in her head and she has to know those pitfalls. And then if she can't seem to conquer it, then you just can't perform. I mean, you're just not going to be able to get there.
And
So
something
again,
like gymnastics, if you get into your head, I mean, it's a safety issue.
yeah,
If I'm running a half marathon and I get into
yeah,
my
you just
head,
walk off the
I just
course.
walk off the course. If she does it in the middle of a floor routine or a vault or something like that,
Yeah,
she's breaking something.
or pole vault.
Yeah, same
You
thing.
know,
Pole vault.
yeah. If you just like you don't trust the bar, you don't trust the grip, you don't trust the run up, then yeah, it's not great. So, but yeah. So what do you guys think? So being an episode about mindset, I think one of the one of the hardest things to sort of discover and people to get into understanding is the zone.
Hmm.
Um, Cody, if I said, what's the zone? What does that mean to you? So
I
somebody's like,
mean,
I'm in the zone. Like, what do you think?
just like dialed in, like laser focused on whatever the task is at hand, whether that's a
Mhm.
workout, whether that's doing your job or, whatever it may be. You're just like giving as much of your undivided attention to what needs to get done.
Yeah.
But I think you need to also understand what actually needs to get done. Like, like think like busy work versus like what needs
Yeah.
to be prioritized, I
Yeah.
guess.
Exactly. You're not distracted. What about you?
Yeah, I mean, mine's both physical and mental. Being in the zone for me is knowing and having confidence in my workouts, in my sleep, in my home life. So that way, I know that like whatever it's going on, whether it's work related, traveling to the trials or a race or biking or anything like that, I can step away and do that task. And my wife has everything locked down at home. I don't have to worry about getting 6 phone calls because where's this or where's that at. It's,
Yeah.
it's all set up. Mentally for me, it is very much being focused and thinking about it. I'll go through whatever it is that I'm doing. If I have a talk with somebody, if I just know I have a big day, going through and mentally going through it 1 or 2 times,
Yeah.
but then also being relaxed enough and taking a couple deep breaths. So my zone is like, I would say if, this side here is going to be 100% laser focus and this is goofing off, I'm like at that 65%.
Yeah. For me, and this is kind of going back to my favorite book here. This is The Inner Game of Tennis with the sports psychology. Um, this is it's not actually just about tennis. It's about sports mindset performance. But the main thing is that you don't draw judgment. And what that means is, in the game of tennis, if you think about it, if you are playing tennis and you think to yourself, oh, my forehand is really good today. Well, that's a judgment. Now, all of a sudden, you're going to hyper focus on your forehand. Now, your forehand becomes a negative thing because you're thinking about it too much. You're not just reacting. Um, Sports is about training and preparation so that when you perform, you just react. You don't actually think. You don't actually come up with a game plan right then and there. You might actually, but for the most part, you're just reacting to a scenario because you don't have enough time to sort of take all this information in. And if you don't draw judgment, then you can get that flow state quicker. You let the subconscious, what you worked on internally every day in practice, kind of come through.
Mhm.
And then it goes the other way too. If you're like, oh, my backhand is really bad today, well, then all of a sudden, of course, your backhand is really bad because your brain's like, oh, I guess my backhand is bad. And then that becomes a detractor because there you sort of set yourself up for failure by doing that. And I think like when you don't draw judgment either way, when you are in a performance and you go, oh, my legs feel crappy today. Well, don't focus on that. Like focus on staying locked in, focus on staying positive, focus on the task at hand. And you might find in a race or an event that that'll go away. Your legs literally might stop hurting and they might stop being tired. Or, if you have an injury and you're kind of dwelling on it, and then all of a sudden you lock into the race and then that injury just might go away. You're like, oh, I started the marathon and I felt my Achilles. And then at mile 5, I just, for some reason, just went away and I just stopped thinking about it. It's like, yeah, that happens all the time. And that kind of comes down to like the judgment side.
I was gonna say, do you think that just comes down to like trusting yourself?
I think, yeah. And so, like, if you put the work in, like I said, the quote earlier, it's like you don't rise to the level of your expectations, you fall to the level of your training. And if your level of training has adequately prepared you for it, then yeah, you will be fine. But if you haven't adequately prepared yourself and you do sense that in your head, then you're going to have that trepidation and that doubt. Then you need to reevaluate your goals and you need to be very honest with yourself about that. Where, if you didn't get the full amount of training in, if you didn't get the full amount of preparation and technical side of it, then you need to be aware of that. And then don't stop your goal, but necessarily understand, but internally understand that, there is a reality to things and you can't will yourself to this next level and go beyond what you're actually physically and mentally capable of.
Yeah, I mean, I have patients that come in with an injury weeks. I'm sure, I mean, all of us do here at the office, where we just don't have enough time to get them fully better. We do our best. We give them, top of tier level treatment, but they don't have the ability to actually the tissue to repair quickly enough. And when it comes down to like these big races that we have locally, where a lot of our patients are coming in, a lot of the time I'm giving them coaching tips on like how to adapt themselves in the middle of the race. If
Yeah.
you feel this is what you should, this is what you should change, or that,
Yeah.
it's like, all right, have a goal, start to run at it. Then from there, if you start to feel this pain, like literally, depending on the pain, stop. Like if it's back pain, like stop and do press ups for 10 seconds. That 10 seconds of stopping can save you minutes of time if you
Yeah.
continue to dwindle your pace. But it's one of those things I tell a lot of patients: bring your pace down to let the pain come away. Once the pain goes away, try and slowly build it back up to your original
Mhm.
pace. And then it's just modulation again, kind of like what I was doing.
Yeah.
And or if I typically have them try to do that twice, and every time if they go up, in a pace, back up to their pace, and it comes right back again, then you have to consciously say, okay, that pace isn't tolerable, for my
Yeah.
time anymore. We now have a goal that Doc and I set where we're going to just drop 15 seconds. And then usually, if you're limping and stuff like that, that's a different, whole different thing. But you just kind of drop back, and then I say do that for like 3 or 4 miles.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, I think like understanding your why is a big component to this as well. Like I said earlier, like, you can't necessarily go beyond your capacity to perform at a certain level that you've prepped yourself, but there's one, sort of joker in in the mix there, and that's emotion. You know, we've always heard stories of like, you know, if somebody's dying, like, you know, mom might be able to pick up a car off her kid, and obviously the emotion of that comes out. And you know, Napoleon said, "One is only brave for the sake of others," and I think that's a great quote because if we're just doing this for ourselves and our self-adulation and how we look and are in society and you know how fast we are, that's one thing. But if we're doing this to try to like this being any sport, tennis, golf, running, whatever, if we're doing this to better ourselves mentally and physically so that we can be better husbands, better wives, you know, better brothers, sisters to our fellow humans, it's like, well, that's an admirable thing. And then pushing yourself to the extreme levels matters there. And say you are genuinely doing it for a family member or a loved one, then that really that emotion pushes you to an extreme level. And so a lot of times when you watch these Olympic games and then you hear these people interviewed after, they'll mention their families, they'll mention their siblings, they'll talk about the people that are close to them, they'll talk about the people they love for their kids and all this sort of stuff. Because we know that if we tie in the emotion, that matters. So like a story about that for me, like, so I didn't run from 2008 to 2009 because I was injured and I thought I was just kind of done running altogether. And I would always tell people I had like a career ending injury. And then one day was just walking around in late 2009 and I'm like, why don't I just go for a run right now? Like, why don't I just try? And I did. I hadn't run probably in about 6 months because every time I kept trying, I was sore. And so I was just fed up. So then I started running and I was like, oh my God, I actually feel really good. And then I had this random vision in my head pop in my head about how awesome it would be if I finished the Olympic trials marathon and I had my family there. And then I thought, oh my God. And it like locked me in. And that emotion of that feeling of doing it for my family and making my family proud of me in that way, like I got back in running. And then a year later, I qualified for the Olympic trials. And that was because I had that emotion sort of tie up in there and that drew me to that next level of performance. So I think everybody sort of needs it. You know, Goggins always talk about this, like know your why. Once you know your why, then it's easy to go into battle. Then it's easy to kind of take off the gloves and really get gritty and really dig yourself to the next level. Um, yeah. So, but yeah, I think that kind of brings up the other point about competition,
Mhm.
where when one of my stepdaughters, she started running track. The very first thing I told her was like, "This is a great sport." You know, she was coming from like dance and other sports, and I was like, "The thing about track is competition will throw most people into a frenzy, and the thing that you have to embrace about this sport is you have to embrace competition because you'll literally never be the best. There will always be competition, but the more you embrace it, the better off you'll be." And a lot of people want to get stressed about who's in the race and you know how they're going to do relative to other people and how people are going to think of them, and that's the wrong thing to do. They need to just go out and execute relative to how they're doing internally.
Yeah. I mean, that's why I like track so much more than like cross country or anything because it takes out all the other variables. Like it's the same distance no matter where you're running, whether it be we live in Ohio, so whether we're in Northeast Ohio, Southeast Ohio, the track is 400 meters. You know, like it. You know, you don't can't be like, oh, this course was hilly. Like the track isn't hilly.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, if it's raining for everybody. It's not like it's only raining in lane one. It's for the entire the entire group. And I have so many athletes that come in and they just immediately put themselves 2 notches down because they're like, oh, it's going to be
I
45
know. Why did
degrees.
it? I
It's
never
45
understood
degrees
why
for
people do
everybody.
that. Yeah, like why people get so obsessed with these intangibles that they can't that they can't manipulate, like the course or the temperature or the time of day that the race is. Like a lot of people freak out about, oh, you know, Boston's at 10 o'clock. Yeah, well, I mean, it's always been that way.
Yeah.
It's really over 100 years. It's been that way. Just quit stressing.
It's the same. I mean, for people that run Akron, so Akron is a fairly hilly, but it's a very fair course. And every time people come in and they're like, yeah, after the race, and they're like, "Oh, Akron, the race director doesn't know what they're doing." No, you don't know what you're doing. You ran on a flat tow path for for,
Yeah.
miles upon miles. You ran at the beginning of the day, which the race is in, late September. So it's always usually in the 70s to the 80s. So you ran at the beginning of the day with your friends. So you weren't pushing a pace. You ran at the coolest part of the day. You ran on a flat, soft ground.
Yeah.
And it's like and you did that for every long run.
Yeah.
So you didn't set yourself up. Akron has concrete roads on part of it. They have some, limestone pathway. They have, hill roads, and you just did flat, and you
Yeah.
didn't prepare yourself.
Yeah, well, that goes back to that level of preparation conversation where and this it happened this year in Boston, it's like Boston was hot
Hmm.
and there was a potential for that. But yet almost never one of not one of my patients tried to literally adapt to the heat. Nobody used our sauna. Nobody used any saunas around them. Nobody tried to do heat training, and they all blew up. It's weird. I mean, like, it's a possibility. I don't understand why you didn't like adequately prepare for that.
Hmm.
So, because obviously that race starts a little later. But that's the thing, like, we were talking earlier about like restaurant conversation and how, if you go to New York City, it's one of the best places in the world to eat because one good restaurant then makes another good restaurant. And then there's a little bit of an arms race between those two restaurants because they're in competition with each other. And then all of a sudden, every restaurant in that area ups their standard. Well, consistently with running, it's like that's also the case where that's why you want to embrace competition. It will pull out the best in you. You'll reach levels that you never thought imaginable because you extended yourself and really embraced it and embraced that struggle with competition.
Do you think competing with yourself is harder than versus others? Like meaning like if you are just comparing yourself versus your past or previous races or times compared to if you actually have people.
This is a great question. I think competing with yourself is harder because you'll never be happy. And when you conquer yourself or you beat yourself or you beat whatever you thought, you're not as elated. But say you are in an actual competition and you beat a genuine competitor, somebody that you want to beat. Yes, there's way more thrill in that. Um, it may not be a negative thing. Like Kip Keino had this famous quote. He's a famous Kenyan runner from the 60s. He said, "Off the track we are brothers, on the track we are fighting." And that was the Kenyan mantra for the rise of Kenyan distance running in the late 20th century. Is that they did not want to lose to each other. They're very alpha male. They're very aggressive, and but yet off the track they were genuine brothers and they believed in each other and they helped each other. But it's like that's a healthy form of competition where, like we were talking about the UFC, where they hug each other after. It's like when you win that match, that's better than losing the match. It feels better, but you needed that struggle to make you feel that to that level. And that's the cool thing about running is you can conquer yourself in so many different ways. You can run faster on different courses, you can run faster in different distances. There's so many different ways to achieve success in running. That's why it's so addicting because it's an endless array of variety and challenges. And also the challenges and variety are very standardized. Like we all know what one lap is and how fast it typically takes all of us to run one lap, or how far a marathon is. And so those standards sort of make it a little bit more fun to challenge ourselves. And so I can see where people want to lock into that, but I also genuinely think that competing with others matters. That's a great question.
Do you think it changes training wise though? Like, is it
Yeah.
better to train alone or with
Oh, so
people?
that's a great question. There we go back to the earlier point of like what matters for the individual. I personally liked training by myself because I didn't want to compromise my training with other people. Like if I had other people training with me, I'm a very like loving, giving person. Like if you come over to my house, I'm going to make sure you always got a drink. I'm going to make sure you're always comfortable. I'm going to make sure you got the best seat in the house. I'm going to make sure you're taken care of. Like that's just how I am. And when I'm training with somebody, I would think that I would be like, oh, I'm thinking how are they feeling? How's the pacing for them? And I realized this about myself even pretty early in my career. And then I'm like, no, I can go to the well more if it's just me. I'm not afraid of challenging myself and I'm not afraid of like really getting after it. So I knew I can hit the high level workouts without somebody around. But not everybody's that way. If you find yourself to be just like a lazy person, and that's not a pejorative, that's not I'm not saying you're negative. If that's your tendency, you're just kind of lazy, you're just kind of like going with the flow, then yeah, being in a group matters more. But if you are like driven and you're tough and you can handle it on your own, like I don't think there's anything negative with that. I think a lot of times you'll compromise.
Yeah. I also think it depends on like your position in running or sport in general. Like if you're in an area where it's super highly competitive, I think it is good to have, some competition like during workouts. But for me, I find that like I'm right on the brink of like being closer to that front pack or could be that second pack. And a lot of times during my races, I find I'm like right in between. So I'm going to be by myself for a good period of time.
Yeah.
So it helps me train mentally so that way I can continue to push the pace that I need to
Mhm.
be, and I'm not falling either back or trying to go above my means
Yeah.
that I can go. But
Yeah. And that's a good point. I think with the competitive area side of it, I see this a lot with my patients because we do live in a competitive area with running. And a lot of my patients will go to Strava to compare what they're doing with each other. And it's an arms race. And
Mhm.
so many of them get injured because they think to themselves, oh, so and so is running this time and they're running this distance. And I have to start doing those things when that's not actually accurate. And they overreach and overtrain and then they get injured. And so I think a lot of times if they just ran a little bit more consistently on their own and then didn't necessarily like feel like they had to constantly challenge themselves relative to their competition, they probably would end up being faster.
Mhm.
That goes back to the original mindset point about you want to be you're mentally successful before you're physically successful.
Mhm.
I also feel like the other thing with mindset is that whenever you're, and again, we kind of go talked about this, like how sport is really a way to sort of teach you how to be better in life. Um, I think if you focus too much on any one thing, then you end up wanting it too bad. But if you focus on it in just an appropriate amount, that you'll end up being better in all things. Um, and so like a lot of people like, especially if they go into like being a professional athlete, that's a very hard thing to do because we hear stories of like a lot of athletes where they just play video games all day long, and I think that's a defense mechanism so they don't dwell and think too much about it and take it too serious. Um, but, it's more a matter of like, we were talking about this on the Ryan Adams episode where, when he was just focusing on running, he felt he wasn't running as well. But when he focused on running and other jobs, then he actually felt like he was doing better, or like even school.
Mhm.
And that's a big thing when people get out of college and then they sign pro. And this is kind of talking a little bit about our trial stuff. A lot of times we'll see them take a step back because they almost take it too serious.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I know
Cool.
for Cairo school, my grades drastically improved as soon as I started doing like extracurricular stuff like running and lifting,
Yeah.
as opposed to like spending literally my first year every waking hour in the library.
Yeah.
And the less I studied, the actually better I got because I was like getting oxygen to my brain and like
Yeah.
allowing it to think. So,
Well, that's the thing, like, I I made it through chiropractic school, running at an elite level, qualifying for the Olympic trials, getting a master's and a doctor of chiropractic at the same time, also working at a running shoe store, and then also being a teacher assistant, a TA. And I did all of that because I figured out how you can use the hack of running to, like, improve your life. And this is, like, for any of you in school that are running, if you want to learn something for the long term, you need to run after your class.
mhm.
And then your brain, like literally after that class, your brain will think about those things, or see even a study session. Say you're studying for like the MCAT or the LSAT. You study and then run right after that. And then your brain will sort of like reorganize those ideas, and it'll actually anchor it deeper into your subconscious. And then so that way you have to study less, because then you go back to your notes later and then you're like, oh my God, I already know all this stuff because my brain was working through it after I was studying it or after the class. So that's how I saved a lot of time there. The other way I save time is if I needed to data dump. say I needed to like just know a little bit of information for like the coming test, but I didn't need to know it long term, then I would run a ton before class, and then I would be really amped up and really like ready to go. And then I would go in the class, and then that would like work more into my subconscious for the short term memory. And then I literally was able to get through grad school almost hardly studying by doing that. It's pretty cool. And the other advantage is that when you're running or working out, then you have brain derived nerve growth factor, which comes in BDNF. And this actually helps you retain information. It actually helps empower and basically secure longer memories and improves learning. And BDNF is released with exercise. And then once it's released with exercise, mixed in with that information ruminating in your head, it's like set in stone.
Cheat code.
Yeah, it's the cheat code for sure. Yeah, for sure. So, any last points on this topic, guys, as we kind of close out talking about mindset and performance, and any mental hacks and tips you got, Cody?
I mean, kind of like what we were saying earlier, like I think a lot of this comes down to just understanding yourself, understanding your goals, what you're trying to accomplish, and kind of just figuring out the best way to do that. Because like you were saying, I mean, some people, I mean, we all kind of perform in different ways. So it's like, you know, what works best for you guys might not work best for me, what might not work best for the next guy. So I think you just need to, like I said, truly know what you want and how much you actually need to put into what you're trying to accomplish.
Know your why.
Yeah.
I think the other thing too is allow yourself the time to experiment. I think a lot of people are too afraid to do that when it comes to different training philosophies and mental philosophies and stuff like that. That's what your easy runs are for. That's what, like, I mean, I'm going to use this example again in track and field. Like, that's what dual meets are for versus like big, invitational meets or, districts or,
Yeah.
states. Because if you do that, you may think that you have the best way of doing it, and then you come across something that you just try off the whim, and a friend tells you, our podcast tells you, some guy down the street tells you, who knows, but it can work for
Yeah.
for anybody, and then if you go in and try it, I mean, again, I had a patient last spring who I told, like, I always ask this question during track is like, what's your go-to like fight song for to amp yourself up, and so many times it's just like the most plain Jane song where I'm like,
Yeah.
that's your fight song, and I'm like, why? And they're like, oh, I like it. I'm like, but that, just because you like something doesn't
Yeah. It
necessarily
doesn't
mean.
put you in the mindset.
And so no joke, I had a guy who was like on the brink of breaking 50 seconds for the 400 and just couldn't get past that. I mean, he was like 51 or 50.1, couldn't do it. And I was like, dude, listen to this song. Is Joker and the Thief by Wolf Mother. And I played it like 3 times during her appointment. And I was like, I want you to go home and listen to it like 10 more times and then play it. And sure enough, he got like 49.6 or something like that on his next. And I mean, he's a collegiate athlete now,
Yeah.
because that was his
That's
breakthrough, breakthrough moment. So, I mean, it probably wasn't the best idea to try that at like, right before districts.
Yeah, but
or
it's something that's innocent that
Yeah.
that easily you can add in and make it effective.
But I think just, to go off of Cody, like, you need to find your why, and you need to find, like, your line. There's a gray line that is like, a perfect line for you. And if you're too afraid to actually experiment and try that, like, I've always been a high mileage guy, and Leo's been telling me for the last year and a half to like drop my mileage. You're doing too much. It's not necessary. And this spring was the first time where I finally went like lower mileage. Now I compensated by doing a lot of biking.
Yeah.
But I mean, with running literally the most that I ever ran for a half marathon was 32 miles for a week, which normally I was in the 70s. I felt just as good.
Yeah.
Like, and you just find what works best for you, and tweaking my my workouts to do that. That was a huge jump for what I
Yeah.
did, but it was an experiment that now works.
Yeah, I would say closing thoughts. I would say it's important for all of us to understand, to remember that the brain doesn't know the difference between reality and dream. That it will react. Um, if somebody, even if you have this thought of something negative happening, you'll react, you will sweat, your eyes will dilate, you'll sweat as if that negative thing is happening. We all know that to be the case. Like, say you're sitting there and you think, oh crap, I forgot to do this. And all of a sudden your body feels that. It may not be true. Maybe you're misplacing that or something like that, but your body will still feel that. And it's important to understand that this idea, because you can use this to your advantage. I forget who said it, was like Frank Shorter or something like that, but they said a race must be run 1,000 times in your head even before you toe the line. And that is so true. And that is how professional golfers deal with it. With the mental side of it, is like just mentally running through these things and understanding that the mental preparation is so critical relative to how you perform, which is also why I think, and this may be a controversial thing for runners out there, I think running with music should be like dessert. It should be very rare. You shouldn't have dessert every day. That's just so you know. You should have it pretty rare if you have it. Cody has it every day. Watch some of his YouTube stuff. But it should be rare, because when you're running, Emil Zatopek says runners must run with dreams in their heart. When you're running or you're performing, you must dream. You must let your imagination and creativity flow, and then kind of work that idea into your subconscious and work that into like what you want your race to feel like, and what you want it to feel like when you win, or what do you want it to feel like when you get your goal. These are all things, and the more that you work that in there, the brain doesn't know the difference between reality and dream. It'll go, okay, I guess this is what we're doing, and then it'll do the thing that you're visualizing because you already told it to do that. And I think that's a very important concept.
Yeah. And then you avoid panic, and too,
Yeah.
because you've gone through this.
Yeah, exactly. You've mentally prepped it, and so you definitely avoid the panic side. All right, guys. Well, thanks for listening to another great episode. We'll have some more coming up, and each week we're going to have these released. And feel free to reach out with any ideas on topics that you guys want for shows. Be sure to like and subscribe our episode. Feel free to leave a review, because this definitely helps us out. And yeah, again, appreciate another week of exploring ideas in the Mind Body Marathon.
Thank you.
See you later.